So today we're going to be talking about artist books and a bit about the process and the format of artist books. And then we're also going to talk about collections and the role of record keeping. So my name is Selena Gilmore and I work for The Works as the Director of Development. And joining me this evening are three wonderful panelists. So I'm going to share a little bit about them. So we have Anne Sherwood Pundyke. She is a New York-based artist and writer. She describes her process as working from the inside out, as she gives form to color, shape, and texture in her paintings on unstretched canvas. This approach to making meaning extends to her writing projects, including her artist book called The Garden, which you're going to get a preview of today. And that's been recently acquired by Denison University's Special Collections in conjunction with her recent exhibition with her other family members at The Works. And that exhibition was called Permission to Create: The Legacy of Mary Sherwood Wright Jones. And then also joining us is Sasha Kim Griffin. Sasha is Denison University's Archives and Special Collections librarian. Sasha has been active in the archives profession since 2009, working with academic archival repositories, museum archives, local government records, and the special collections. Her professional interests include digital curation and preservation, archival literacy concepts, and the intersection of public history and archival records. And then we are also joined by Stephanie Kays. Stephanie is the Fine Arts Librarian at Denison University. In addition to being the Fine Arts Librarian, Stephanie is also the Liaison Librarian for Women and Gender Studies and East Asian Studies at Denison. Her background includes studio art, archival studies, and library and information sciences. So thank you all for joining us today and for your involvement in today's conversation. Sasha, I wanted to hand it off to you first. I was hoping you could kick us off by providing some insights into the role of record keeping and your philosophy on being an archivist.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, one of the things about working at Denison that has been so important is that we are all part of the teaching and learning experience for the students. My philosophy as an archivist is to document experiences and life on campus, but also to experience those feelings as well. One of the wonderful things about our special collections here at Denison is that we do have the ability to not only collect the history of Denison and those institutional records, but also we have the ability to create some new collections based off of interests or student and faculty scholarship areas. And so about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more, Denison began collecting artist books. Since then, we have, Stephanie and I have grown that collection, and we have about 300 artist books now in our collection. And we've even started a zine collection. We have almost 100 zines. And so when we are looking at these things, not only are we wanting to record what students' interests are in the moment, but also being able to influence what student scholarship or research is going to be. And a lot of times when we think about artist books or zines and things like that, we want to provide a teaching collection of inspiration. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Sasha. And then Stephanie, I wanted to hand it off to you. Could you speak a little bit more about what an artist book is and how artist books differ from typical book format?
Sure. So anytime anyone asks me to define or give a definition of the artist book, I immediately think back to my sort of initial encounters with artist books and artist book collections 20 years ago when I was working in the library of the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, which has a phenomenal artist book collection. And my time there was spent with a mentor, Rosemary Furtak, and she really introduced me to the artist book. She was the librarian there since the early 80s and really was a pioneer in sort of creating the collection of the artist book, right? Seeing it as a special collection, really noticing that these books were different from other books. And so I always think about her and her definition of the artist book. And that is, she said that the artist book are books that refuse to behave like other books. A book that refused to behave like other books. So that's my favorite definition of, of the artist book. But you know, before we started here, Anne just brought to our attention, you know, another great article that kind of categorized different types of artist books. So there are, of course, 40 plus years now. There's lots of descriptions on what makes an artist book, you know, different categorizations. But I'll just kind of say in general, like the artist book is a work of art or an artistic expression that is influenced by the book, whether it's the form or function of the book. So it really could be many different things. You might see an artist book that on kind of initial contact looks like a regular book that, you know, we think of as a regular book. You might see something that looks nothing like a book as we know it. It could be created through, you know, fine press printing. It could be all handmade. It could be created through digital technologies, as well as you know, completely sculptural in form. So it really could be anything. What I think artist books do is invite us to just kind of consider and think about attributes of the book and its form, whether it's like sequence and context, or just the participant, right? The physical experience of the participant as you move through the artist's book. So I think when we collect together, we think about that too, the form of the different forms that an artist book can take. And because it is a teaching collection, you know, we're trying to think about the form, how it's created to give students, you know, examples of what an artist book can be, what it can look like, but also a diversity of ideas too. So what kind of story, what message is the book telling, and in what ways is it telling that story? And again, thinking about the students and their stories, and trying to provide really great examples for them in their kind of journey and creation of artist books. And I think that's what we kind of pulled today was some of our favorites, not all of our favorites, because we have a lot of great artist books, but also kind of just to give you a diverse example of what's in our collection and what an artist book might look like.
Absolutely. No, we're excited to see them. And I know you have a few laid out in front of you. If you want to take this time to go ahead and go through some of them and maybe highlight some aspects, that would be wonderful.
Well, one of the things that when we think about artist books that don't behave like other books, I really like thinking about how sometimes an artist book really does just look like a book. And I'm going to move some of these out of the way so that we can maybe focus a little bit more. So this is a book called Red Past Tense. And one of the things that's very interesting about this is at first glance, it really does look like a regular book that is behaving like other books. But the more you look at it, and especially if you've got warm hands, one of the really cool things about this is that the ink is temperature controlled. So as you're looking through it, you can see as it warms up, you can literally read between the lines. And so sometimes when we think about how messages are being portrayed, it's very interesting to think about the overt messages, but then also the subtle messages or the hidden messages. And I think artist books do that very well.
And that was by Heather Weston.
Yes,
Read
this is by Heather Weston.
Past Tense.
Yes. Thinking about that idea of different forms and being able to show examples, and especially things that can be replicated. And your exhibition was called Permission to Create. And in a sense, that's sort of the reason why we collect things like this at an academic archive and special collections, because we want to give examples and show that students can replicate some of these techniques and then in that find their own. This is what's called a flexagon. And as you go through, these are the pages. And it really pushes that idea of what are pages, what are books, And how does the order of which we experience them matter? This is called Invocation to the Water Spirits. And it's actually based on an indigenous chant. So I really like this one. It's fun and it's very physical to the extent that people really like interacting with it.
Mhm.
And that's something different too than regular books. Artist books you really want to interact with because there are so many different pieces to it. This is called Invented Landscape. It's by an artist named Julie Chen. And it's all wrapped up in this cloth container. And a lot of times I like to talk about containers as being the covers of an artist book. And those containers look like a lot of different things. But as this opens up and this comes out, there's so much shape. I know we've got sort of two views here, but there's so much shape to this. Everything's at a slant and an angle, which makes it so much fun. And then as you open this up, you've got sort of two things. You've got this accordion shaped book with images and text that can go back and forth. Or you can open it up this way and experience it in the opposite way of seeing the image and the text. And again, this is just one of those really fun artist books to interact with and to move with. Some of our collection is very form-based. You can tell that the interests are so influenced by artist techniques. And it makes that interaction a surprise, right? And this is called The Fortune Teller. And
Melina Gupta.
Melina Gupta,
2016.
thank you. From 2016, and it's called The Fortune Teller. And this box lid just opens up and each panel falls down. And at first glance, much like the red past tense book, it looks very playful. We've got what some people call the cootie catcher, a pretty common child's game, and used as like a way to tell your fortune. And it comes accompanied with this beautiful paged story, this narrative. And then on second glance, if you are looking, some of these responses are not quite as playful. You're a liability if you are a girl. And a lot of this is based on her own experiences and her own culture. And the story is so compelling that discusses things like assault and harassment and sexual abuse in this beautiful, pretty box. And there's so much messages that can come through this, right? Things related to the appearance of things versus the reality, or just the social commentary that comes along with being a woman in this culture, or being a woman in any culture, and those kinds of implications. We have another artist book that talks a little bit about the women's experience. Specifically, this was created as part of the Women's March in 2017 on January 21st. I don't know who all participated, but this, a big part of that, right, was some of those signs that became very popular on Facebook and Instagram being shared. And this little band says that this is for portable protest. And as you look through, it has this beautiful quote by Alice Walker. And this is a type of accordion fold that opens up that. And on each page has little portable protest signs. So there's two cameras going on, and they're both fun to watch. And, you know, especially when we think about how history repeats itself, I know that there are a lot of these same things coming up today. And so this has been really fun to show to classes, both that are artistic classes, but also some of the social sciences and women's and gender studies, because it does document a time and a place, an event. It is a primary source in an archival sense, but it's also a lovely example of art in book form.
That's by Taylor Cox.
Yes, by Taylor Cox.
But that's a great point. You know, in addition to our art students, there are other students and opportunities on campus to create different types of assignments. You know, it's not just, you know, writing papers, but, you know, they're creating videos and podcasts and all sorts of creative things all across the curriculum. And so these are great for all of our students, really. This is a
This was one of our more recent ones. I think we bought this in the last few years. It's called The Square, and it's by
Islam Ali.
Islam Ali.
Yes.
And one of the things that's very interesting about this, and I'm going to try and get it close up, is that this is all carved, like laser engraved. This binding is so pretty.
This is a Coptic binding, so I think it's going to stab through the fold. But yeah, it looks like he's colored the edges and then used like a laser to create. Yeah, and I think this is it's supposed to be the streets on the edges here, the streets and the map, the continuation of the in Cairo.
So this is related to the Arab Spring and the revolution that happened in Egypt in 2011. And it plays with this idea of map, but also this burned laser engraving. I'm going to lift it up so you can see it in a little bit more detail. And it's in multi-pages. So perhaps this one cutting is in maybe 10 pages or so until it gradually gives way to another cutting. And each of these shapes are part of these quarters or choirs. That's the word, right? And there's no words in this.
I think there's the very end, so if we can find that.
That's right, I forgot.
That's right. The people have brought down the regime. February 11th, 2011. The people want to bring down the regime. The people want to bring down the regime. The people have brought down the regime. So this is Tahrir Square, and then documenting those 18 days until they have brought down the regime.
It's beautiful. Anne and I had the opportunity to actually visit Denison University's collections, where Sasha and Stephanie showed us some of these, and they're so amazing in person in particular. It feels like a whole experience. It feels very immersive for a book. And you know, it's interpretive, but yet it's playful. So it's really dark, maybe some of the subject matter, but the playful formatting, it's confusing but really intriguing, I found. They're beautiful works. Thank you both for sharing those with us. I wanted to reintroduce Anne again to kind of introduce her book, which is in Denison's collection, which is called The Garden, and talk a bit about her practice as well. So Anne, take it away.
Oh, well, I am reminded of that really lovely morning we spent together looking through the books, including some of the ones that we've seen today. And it was this combination of being able to experience the intimacy, which is, you come to your own conclusions about the book. You look at it, it's welcomes you to, explore it in a very intimate way. At the same time, we really couldn't help ourselves from sharing with other, with everyone around the table. So it was this, this combination of having this personal, very moving experience from book to book, given the different stories of hardship or protest, and then comparing notes and sort of looking at how one book would share a certain quality or was different from, and some of the kind of in terms of maybe this formal set of ideas about like what is the unruliness of the artist book as a category, the fact that it doesn't want to behave. You kind of look at different components, like the cover and the the inside versus the outside, and I think the reference to the different components of what you think of in a normal book, which would be definitely maybe there's words in the book or images in the book, and how are those used in different ways to maybe provoke thought through a kind of unruly context. So for the garden, as Selena mentioned, this was launched at an exhibition at the Works called Permission to Create, which was a celebration of my grandmother's life as an artist and illustrator, along with work by Michael Kennedy and Phoebe Pundyke, other family members. And our grandmother was really known primarily for her work as a children's illustrator. So I grew up, really understanding or having this sort of connection with that format of you have a story and then you have an illustration, and you kind of, even if you're not yet old enough to read, you can enjoy the pictures and you sort of go back and forth. So that kind of early experience of connecting your, your own feelings with something that you're reading and holding in your hand was the almost kind of the inspiration for this book. And it has, I wanted to modify expectations, however, in terms of an illustrated book. So instead of having the story, the book has 11 one-page short stories, sort of fables, if you will. And in front of each story is an abstract image. And I work my painting, as Selena mentioned, I like to think of it as working from the inside out, where I'm connecting with, mood and emotion and, integrating ideas about personal narrative into the work through color and geometry. So the images in the book, you see the image first and, respond however, through your own set of experiences and associations. And then following the image is the story that I've written. And there's a small motif in terms of the design of the book. The little black and white motif that's at the top of the story is is a replication of the image right before it, so that you can kind of make that connection that that's the image that's associated with the story for this book. But I like the open-endedness of seeing the the symmetrical shapes and responding, thinking about color associations, water, sky, texture, and then having it be grounded in a specific narrative that I've written. And just like with, really, I have to think almost all of the books that we looked at Denison in the collection, you know, this is, it tells a personal story for me. There's a kind of, you know, reconciliation with a series of, you know, challenging, difficult, sad events. And, but it, through the sequence of the sort of symmetrical images, which I feel to me has a sort of maternal feeling. It reminds me of, you know, there's an aspect of parenting where there's a mirroring, a kind of sharing of experience between parent and child. And so there's, I like to think of it as a sort of maternal mode through the images. And then I've organized the book so that the very first image and the very last image disrupt that kind of balance and indicate a sort of shift in awareness. In the first instance, it's this kind of painful experience. And then at the conclusion of the book, the last story is a kind of acceptance of, you know, this sort of shaking of the family tree. And the garden is this kind of mythical place where, you know, healing and communication and, you know, resolution between, you know, these sort of disparate, maybe, you know, conflicting, you know, viewpoints can take place. So I think of in my painting and in the garden, I often will actually sew pieces of fabric together or paper. And I like to leave the colored threads dangling so that there's a sense of, you know, reinforcing this idea of a joining together. And so for the garden, there's a technique called Smith sewn binding, where groups of pages are literally sewn together with threads, and we selected a range of colors so that each section that's sewn is with a different color, and the binding is not trimmed and it's open and exposed. So this idea of all of these stories, and even maybe the subject of the book having to do with threads that connect, you know, maybe there's a tenuousness and a vulnerability to the idea of a thread as something that's, you know, a small line, if you will, but it's also, you know, when bound together, it forms a very strong bond. So that play of physical bond and metaphorical bond was what I was trying to do with the book. And it was a roughly 5 or 6 year project to bring it to fruition. And I was really happy to be working with Space Sisters Press in the last round of the design. Emily DeVoe and Gretchen Krause helped me bring, you know, the sort of all of these qualities that I was looking for in the book together. And it was a wonderful process.
Thank you, Anne. And I wanted to open it up now for anyone who has any questions. If you want to drop them in the chat, or any of our panelists, if there's anything that you would like to share or ask of one another. Just wanted to give you all a couple of minutes to do that if you have anything you would like to ask. So feel free to drop anything in the chat that you're thinking of.
While we're waiting for some questions, I thought I could pull this out. While Anne was visiting, we just happened to have out Joseph Alber's Interaction of Color. And this is a book that we've used for classes for years and years and years. It's a very rare first edition.
Yes, yeah. So this is from 1963, I believe, and it's an edition of 2000, and it was created as a teaching tool for students and educators to present certain sort of concepts of color theory.
And when this was out, it was so interesting because both Selena and Anne sort of started to share their own experiences with this Albers artist and plates, and reminiscing about color theory and how it affected them. And in a sense, Anne, you had mentioned how it also has affected your art, the idea of how these colors play together.
Right. I think it's a core, design theory, the color, his color theory that I think, many, many people have experienced in the classroom. And I know Selena and I talked about how it's somewhat regimented. It's very methodical, but the experience of learning the way, how variable and how colors are really, the way they look has so much to do with the color that's around them, and that they, can actually seem to change depending on what's next to them. So it's, it's a real challenge to the idea of a color being a set thing. And I think it really opens up the language of pure color, which is something that I wanted to celebrate in the garden and I use in my painting as well. And it's a true language. And this is almost like the dictionary. And it was wonderful to have it there. When we first met, it was almost like the connecting point for talking about the books.
Yeah, it kind of blew my mind because it's something that's used as an example so often in every art course I took, especially my painting courses and color theory, and to see it in person was just overwhelming to me. Like, it's real.
Yeah, this one gets used a lot, and we have this one as part of the original set of silk screens, but there've been many publications since that are in our circulating collection. So it still gets used almost probably every year through our students, every semester through our studio arts folks. So yeah.
That's wonderful.
It's just an amazing resource that not a lot of students get the opportunity to experience as well.
Right, we do have a question in the chat. So Beth Ann said, what surprises people or you about artist books?
Sorry, what surprises what?
What surprises people in general or yourselves about artist books?
What surprises me? I think every artist book in and of itself is a surprise, because rarely is it what it seems it's going to be. And there are layers. I can look at the same artist book 10, 15 times and I'll get something a little bit different depending on my own mood, or maybe something that's happened in my life recently, or some conversation I've had. Sometimes it just hits a little bit differently. And I think that the versatility of artist books and art in general, of being what the person can experience out of it, I think that that's something very special to artist books that you can't get from a mass publication in the same way.
Yeah, I've having toured a couple of different collections of artist books in the last couple of months, it really boils down to this little charge of delight that you get with it, with each book. It's just like the surprise element is just, there's so much pleasure involved in experiencing the books.
Oh, I love that. I remember when you were here, I think there was a little squeal or a moment of something when you opened the fortune teller and you weren't quite sure what to expect. Yeah, I think that's right. That moment of delight. I think for students too, there's that kind of like, oh, this is a book, um, or the question of like, what makes this a book, or an artist book. But I think it's also surprising for a lot of students that they can tell their complex stories in an incredibly creative, but still bookish way. And so I think it just gives them a lot of ideas on just kind of just the vast ways that you can be creative and still tell your own personal story. Yeah, lots of surprises always. And sometimes those surprises don't come until after multiple kind of experiences with the book.
Thank you all. So we have another question from Nancy. She says, are most artist books unique or made in editions?
I think most of our artist books, and I think for the artist books should be an edition, but that might not be right. I think most of our artist books are editions from an edition, whether it be a small or open edition. But I also think, again, the spirit of the artist book was, I think, for me, is to, back when they started being created, was the idea that like people like you and me can have art in our homes, right? We can like, this art could be, accessible to a lot of people, that it didn't have to be this one thing that was hidden away in the museum, but these artworks can move about and be affordable and be experienced and owned to a kind of a broad audience. And so I know, I think they should be, but they're not always, but I think for our collection, they usually are.
I think that like with other aspects of design and content and subject matter, our goal is to have a representative of just about any aspect of artist books that we can add to the collection. And sometimes that is limited editions, this Flexagon, for instance, pieces of this were printed, right? They didn't handwrite this, but the folding and the care that went into it, the individualism, I mean, that's something that is put into this run. And so this run was, if you can see these little numbers, this is an example of how they would number it. The 175 were created, and this copy is number 67. And having said that, though, I mean, there are really good examples of artist books that have come in editions. Do you want to talk a little bit about your?
Oh no.
No, are you sure? But sometimes, some of these artist books, they're made and they affect people so deeply that they want to make another run. And sometimes that will look like a different, maybe a slightly different form or a slightly different design. And it's not so much a second edition as much as it is maybe sometimes a rebooted version or some remixed version sometimes as well. And
Can I interrupt?
Yes,
I think they mean that as an individual object, most of ours, when I say edition, it's like they are editions like this.
Oh,
where they're and so I don't think we have any unique objects. Is that what you were talking about? Is that what the question was?
I think you hit on it. It was, sorry, I was reading a new one to propose to you guys. 1 second. Or if they're unique or made in multiple editions.
Right.
Yeah.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
I misunderstood.
No. I think that's a really good, but that answers another question. I think that's a really good point. But feel free to ask on to your other question there.
Yeah, so we have another question. This one is coming from Tony. They said, sorry, I gotta scroll here for a second. I'm sure you've all had experiences with artist books in a language you're not fluent in. Did you find removing that context made the art more intriguing or gave more room for abstract interpretations?
Oh gosh, that's a great question because that's accurate. We do have books like that. this is going to be different for everybody, how they enter a book or engage with a book. For me, I'd probably kind of go through it and try to kind of work with it a little bit. But then I want to know, like, I want to read the artist statement. I want to know what's going on. So, I mean, I think ultimately I won't have that same experience as somebody, who could read that language. But I rely on the artist to tell me what's going on. And that way we can kind of express to other students in the classroom, would that book accurately express the artist's intent and message and story behind that. But certainly it would be a different experience. But of course we've got students who speak all languages. And so, what might be an experience for me is going to be a different, maybe more meaningful experience for one of our students or somebody else. So that's certainly, yeah.
And we do have some modern languages classes coming in specifically to look at artist books. I think there was a Spanish class that came in to look at some of the books that we had in Spanish and specifically how some of that artwork differed from other languages. But it also reminds me a lot of what Anne was explaining about the garden. And, when we're children, or if we can't read yet, how we experience that picture first.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, and back to the idea of the language of color. It has a universality to it that can cross specific, nationalities and even or abilities, and that's the appeal to me of abstract color, pure abstract color.
These are amazing questions. Thank you all. And thank you, panelists, for this wonderful conversation and sharing these beautiful artworks with us and a little bit about their history and creation. And I want to invite you all or encourage you all to visit Denison University's archives if you get the chance. They're typically there Monday through Friday from 9 to 4 or by appointment. So you can email archives@denison.edu with any further questions about that. And if you're interested in purchasing Anne's book, The Garden, they are available locally here at the Works and our gift shop as well. So feel free to stop by the Works Tuesday through Saturday from 9 to 4. We have currently quarterly art exhibitions, workshops, and interactive programs for all ages. So we'd love to have you in. But yeah, if there's any other last questions or any other last comments and anything else?
I'd love to reiterate how grateful I am to have the garden be part of Denison's special collection. Jenna Silrasso and Raj Bolani, as well as Selena, played a role in introducing me to the collection, and it's just been a delight, just like my experience of Artist Book in general, to converse about the importance of the archive, the importance of the Artist Book as an educational tool, learning tool, as well as, an expressive work. So I encourage, anyone who'd like to go make an appointment or drop by and see for yourself, and, and also, why not make your own Artist Book?
I love that. That's the perfect takeaway, right? Make a book that refuses to be a book. All right, well, thank you, Sasha and Stephanie, for joining us. And we really appreciate you showing us this beautiful selection of books in Denison University's archive collection. And thank you all, our participants, for viewing this talk today. It will be available on the Works' YouTube channel if you want to share it or look at it later. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great evening. I almost said weekend. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.